Hello, everyone. So I'm back today with a very special guest. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Seth Hernandez, and I am the filmmaker behind The Unseen.
So tell me a little, because don't think the majority of the audience would have seen this documentary at this point. So just kind of give a brief summary of the documentary in your own kind of words.
Yes. So, Unseen is a film that follows my friend Pedro, who is an aspiring social worker as he navigates the uncertainties of life as an undocumented immigrant here in the US and also a blind individual. The film pretty much is a story about desire, I guess, wanting something really bad. In Pedro's case, to get his degree to become a social worker because you think that getting that thing you want will allow you to resolve the problems that you are navigating in life. But once you get that thing, finally, after all these years, you realize that actually it doesn't do the things you thought it would. And if anything, more problems and challenges emerge. So, what do you do with this realization and this uncertainty that you have to face?
So when you have a festival like Hot Docs, you get a lot of documentaries, a whole bunch of different styles, right? You learn and you kind of understand a whole bunch of different styles. So what does a documentary actually mean to you? Like, what does that word mean?
Hmm. What does documentary mean to me? Maybe expanding beyond just documentary also. You know, geez, she says the remembering of a people relates not so much to the remembering of an idealized golden past, but rather a painful past and people's responses to that pain. All I'm saying, I guess, is for me, whether it's documentary or for me at least, any creative work that I do, it's an act of remembering. I think particularly in the case of our film, the story that we have, Pedra's story is so unique and specific, but also it's so universal also and relevant to any individual, you know, and by documenting, by uplifting Pedro's story, we're finding ways to remember this moment in history, this individual, this experience, that happened in the course of history and making sure that it's not forgotten, for future generations, because I think some way, somehow, whoever you may be, you could get something out from this story. So all this to say, I think documentary for me is an act of remembering, and in that remembering, I think there's also an act of justice that we allow to prevent the erasure of these kinds of stories.
So that's interesting because I guess my next question actually leads perfectly off of that, which is, what drew you to this specific story? Because you're talking about the act of remembrance. There's a lot of stories, I'm sure, as you know, and as most of us know, that deserve to be kind of remembered. So what made you decide of all the stories that this was the one you thought was something you could effectively make a film about?
Yes. So Pedro and I met in a program that I was helping to run for other undocumented young adults here in the US. And I myself am also an undocumented immigrant. And when I was doing more community organizing work, I was kind of recognizing that the experiences of immigrants with disabilities are rarely really uplifted in the movement that I was a part of. So for for me, when I met Pedro, I was really interested in how can we make sure that, this experience, to your point, and to what I was just saying earlier, is not erased, and rather like made sure to be included in the rhetoric around immigrant justice, or immigrant rights in the US. But along the way, the film, it took 7 years to make this film. Along the way, during the last 7 years, um, the film became more than just about the identities, that Pedro have and the intersectionality of being undocumented and having a disability. The film ended up becoming also about um, healing, maybe, and understanding who we are and being vulnerable, so all this to say that I think what drew me into Pedro to start filming with him and to ask him was the advocacy and this act of, remembering a certain experience within a social context. But what ended up causing me to stay longer, and to not let go of the project is the human connection, beyond the identity. There's an incredible and a very tender human being who is just like anybody else trying to figure out really how to deal with the uncertainties of life. And I think that's what drew me to the story ultimately at the end.
And when you kind of make a documentary in general, and especially I feel like in this case, there's a lot when you have a subject who may be in a sensitive situation, right? There can be challenges that kind of come about when it comes to making sure you use, you're accurately kind of portraying what's happened while also being sensitive to the fact that your subject is still a human who, has a lot of things going on and all this other stuff. Were there any challenges you faced which kind of in like prohibited maybe you showing some things, or was there some collaboration in terms of the editing of the documentary?
Yeah, I love that question, Khalil. To your point, documentary historically has been kind of very ethnographic, maybe almost like, like studying a person, and the person behind the camera is quote unquote objective observer, and the approach of the outsider's gaze is not really, what's the term? It's not really, I'm forgetting the term in all languages that I know. It's like it's not influenced, by the person, about whom the story is. But um Pedro is my friend, like I said, and for me, I'm really interested in preserving all of my relationships with all the people that I care about. So all this to say, also Pedro is in a more vulnerable situation. It's not like Pedro is some powerful CEO with hundreds of lawyers behind him who can just, have counsel available to him with a snap of his fingers when something happens.
Right.
I think there's these power dynamics, there's these layers of vulnerability, as in like political, physical vulnerability that one has, aside from the emotional vulnerability, of course, that we have to consider. So for Unseen in particular, the approach that we had is making sure that whenever we have a cut of the film, I would check in with Pedro and sharing with him, the trajectory of the story, making sure that he feels like he's being represented properly and accurately in the film. Because for me, my main, I've told this to Pedro before, and we've also shared about this, but for me, the primary audience of the film has always been Pedro. My goal is that by the end of making this film, I want Pedro to feel like he watches the film and he's like, oh wow, this film is about me. That's me on screen. You accurately captured who I am. That's really my goal. And actually yesterday when we had our US premiere, he literally told me that this is about me. You got it correctly. So all this to say, in the course of editing and making sure that, I accurately portray Pedro, I did intentionally make sure that I would check in about him, about the trajectory of the story.
And so obviously this doc, you said you want it to kind of be, you want Pedro to see himself in the documentary because it's obviously a documentary about him. How did you want other people who are, you know, who have visual eyesight problems or whatever, how do you want them to be able to see themselves in this? Do you think they'll be able to kind of relate to that story?
Yeah, that's just an important question. So I think maybe there's two ways that I'll answer that question that are related to each other. So the film deals with, folks who come from certain experiences, particularly people that are undocumented immigrants, and to your point, people with disabilities, blind individuals, low vision individuals. And I think for me, the film caters to these audiences that are often overlooked. Because when you have a film about disability, when you have a film about immigration, usually the filmmakers that, tell these stories are not from these communities. And for Unseen, we really wanted to make sure that the filmmaking team reflects Pedro's identity. So aside from me being an undocumented filmmaker, we also have filmmakers who have disabilities, as part of our team, so that we can make sure that the story that's being portrayed on screen is reflective of the community. So all this to say that for me and for our team, immigrant and audiences with disabilities are really our primary audiences, and at the same time, beyond this primary audience, there's also a larger primary audience, which includes all of us. I feel like making a film and watching a film feels like, for me at least, like it feels like therapy. So when during the pandemic, like it was a very emotionally fraught time for a lot of people. For me, I watched a lot of movies because I was trying to make sense of, I have this feeling, that it's really difficult to understand, but I don't know what that feeling is, So what I did is I watched movies to try to find another human being who has gone through the same things that I'm going through. And by understanding that someone else has gone through it, it makes me realize, oh my gosh, this is the thing I'm feeling, and there's this
Right.
catharsis that I felt. So what I'm ultimately saying is that Pedro's story, while it is about a person with very specific identities, at the end of the day, it's a film about dealing with the uncertainty of life, being vulnerable, and letting your guard down, being your authentic self. All these things are human experiences that we all kind of navigate, and especially like for folks of color and for immigrants, maybe, like honoring your parents' sacrifices after all that they've given you, navigating imposter syndrome. These are things that you don't have to be undocumented or have a disability to navigate, and what I'm saying ultimately is those human emotions that Pedro navigates in the film, I think is something that can really resonate with different people.
So that's interesting because I think one of the things that at least struck me when I was watching this was there's I don't know if it's the majority of the movie, but there are definitely points where there are you basically can't see anything. It's very blurry. Was that an intentional thing that you were doing? And how did you kind of do that? Because I was thinking the entire time, was it Vaseline on the lens or what was it?
Yes, it's a great question. So like I mentioned, right, ever since what making the film, it's a film about Pedro, so I want to make sure that the film is accessible to him, right? So what the idea was from the get-go is that how do we make a film about a person who is blind and have that film be as enjoyable for that individual as it would be for a sighted or a person who's not blind, And um in the course of doing that, I asked Pedro, so how do you watch movies? So he was the first person that really told me about audio descriptions. In essence, audio descriptions, if you watch streaming platforms, you'll notice that there's an option to activate audio descriptions so that you can hear a narrator describe the images that's happening in the film that doesn't have sound or dialogue, right? So in essence, it's watching a film by listening. Often we think about film as a very visual medium, which it is, so in essence, how do we flip this idea of creating a film that's based on sound? So the blurriness of the film, in essence, is an invitation for sighted viewers, to not so much use visual cues to receive information, but rather to really listen, and in that effort, hopefully make the experience of watching the film as even as possible. It will never be completely the same for everybody, who have different disabilities, but we tried to find a way to make sure that, like if you watch this film, you'll get an experience that as similar as possible to this other audience. And to your question, a lot of the blurriness, that we have in the film, maybe also in the course of the edit, the blurriness ends up becoming more than just about, disability. It's about hiding ourselves, it's about showing ourselves. If you're undocumented, maybe you're not always open about that part of yourself, and sharing it with others, and a lot of the cinematography of the film, the blurriness actually was in camera. There were times that I would film without a lens. The opening scene of the film, for example, was filmed without a lens. What I would do is that I would cover the body of the camera, the aperture of the camera, with gaffer's tape, and I would poke a hole on the tape. I learned this trick from a mentor, Christy Tully, and through that very small hole, just enough light comes into the body of the camera to make an image. There were also times that I would
Hmm.
shoot with a lens that's called a tilt shift lens. The lens bends pretty much, so that it distorts the image, just so much that it's blurry a certain way. And we also use a lot of shallow depth of field lenses. So all of this to say, I didn't have a $3,000 camera, which is actually the case. We did not have like a fancy camera, except for maybe the triathlon scene, where um there's somebody swimming, so we had to figure out how to film that properly.
That's interesting, actually, that the way you did that. Now, kind of a follow up on that is, so how did you kind of figure out what the right, like, because obviously it wasn't completely black, it was, there was still light and you could still see kind of things. How did you figure out the right balance so that it was still picture but it wasn't too much?
Yes. That's actually a feedback that we have, received in the course of editing the film. It's interesting. I think maybe Khalil, to be honest, this is the first feature that I made, right? I think so much of creative work is about listening to your intuition, or a lot. Actually, it's not even my own intuition. Sometimes, like, my body and my it's almost like it's like not me controlling the camera, because I was the cinematographer for almost all of the film except our one last final shoot, um and when I would film and then I would watch the footage, when I watched the footage, I was like, oh my gosh, I had no idea that this is how I did it. All this to say that there was no formula that I did. I just listened to the moment that was happening. I would adjust the lens, a certain way. I would not use the lens, during certain moments. Like, there was no formula. All I'm saying is, like, I did not figure it out. Like, I just allowed this inner guide, to guide me, and ultimately that's how I ended up with the film.
That's interesting because I wasn't sure, because sometimes, sometimes there's people who have a lot, like a very specific method or a specific, like, oh, I had to do this and this. So it's interesting that yours was more of a kind of a intuition, which I think, and again, I think it turned out great. So,
Oh, thank you. And I think, to your point, like, I mean, we filmed over the course of 7 years, right? I think in the beginning it was very much just that, but especially when you're like in development and trying to figure out what's the look for this film. I think as time went by, we started to figure out, okay, maybe these moments, it would be helpful to have more clarity,
right,
um, like the final shoot that we had, for example, the triathlon as an example, thematically that the triathlon is a space for Pedro to navigate, to cope with his with the challenges that he has in life. So for those scenes, it made sense to maybe have more clarity, So I think as time went by, that intuition just became second nature, that I could be in sync with it and plan a little bit, but even when you plan, things go awry. I guess
right.
ultimately that's what I'm saying too, that you can never fully plan for anything, when you're making a documentary film.
So I guess the second to last question I have for
For
you is
sure.
kind of what do you want audiences who are, maybe haven't thought about, issues like this, any of these issues in great depth? What do you want them to kind of take away and leave the like watching the documentary with?
I think for me, I think I think for me, the film is more than just about the issues of that we present. It is very much present. Like
Right,
disability and immigration. Those issues are very real, and they have like tangible effects on people's life. Like for example, Pedro and I, we couldn't attend in person our world premiere at Hot Docs because we're undocumented. We could have maybe attended, we just couldn't have returned back to our homes here in the US. But
right,
I think for us, this is what I also get from Pedro. Ultimately what we want people to connect with is the the fact that dealing with the uncertainties of life, dealing with pain, dealing with depression, like dealing with our own inner demons, you're not the only one that's navigating that, and I hope that, you know, all the audiences could feel an invitation that as you deal with your inner demons, it's okay to recognize that. Because I think sometimes we suppress our sadness, we suppress our pain, and we just want to be strong for the people around us, and we want to show to the world that we can do it. And I think to a certain extent that's fine, but maybe at some point also we have to be open to just be vulnerable, and not have to prove our worth. All of us are worthy of dignity. Every person is, amazing and loved and cared for. Ultimately, I guess what we want to take away from what we want audiences to take away from the film is that yes, these issues are very much real. And also we want to make sure that people don't pity Pedro. Pedro is not someone to pity. He's an amazing, powerful individual. And what we want audiences to instead connect with is that human story that all of us navigates. And maybe, if you are really interested in, supporting some of the issues that present themselves in the film, you can go to the film's website, which is unseen-film.com, to learn more about our impact campaign, which seeks to really create a more equitable world for people with disabilities, for immigrants, undocumented people, and pretty much everybody.
and the link to the website is in the description. So if anyone watching wants to, check it out, it's there. Now where can people find this if they were like if they listen to this and they're like, I really want to watch this now? Where can people watch it?
Yes, thank you so much for that shout out. So if folks are in the US, depending on when this will be airing, we
Monday.
will be Monday. Oh, great. Okay. So if you are, thank you so much. If you are in the US, please do join us for our Northern California premiere at CamFest in San Francisco. We'll be screening at the Roxy on May 14th. And from there, we're also screening in other festivals throughout the summer and the fall. Announcement yet to be made. And then last week it was announced that we will be having our US broadcast through the PBS documentary program POV early in 2024. So there will definitely be lots of ways to engage with the film between now and the end of the year and into next year. So here we go.
Do you know what the international kind of situation is, or especially in Canada, like the
I
wide
think as
release?
we continue to navigate the distribution, that's when we'll continue to learn how about the international distribution. Because as we do the film festivals, we're also speaking with different distributors. So once
Right.
once that is in the works, please do you can keep posted actually by going to our website and going and subscribing to our newsletter and following us on social media. Watch Unseen Film.
Perfect. And you did half the plug there. So what do you have anything else? Do you want to kind of promote anything else? Do you want to promote your own social media or anything before we kind of
Oh,
end?
thank you so much for that platform, Khalil. Yes, folks can also follow me as an individual at Seth Hernandez R on Instagram. And again, Unseen is Watch Unseen Film on all social media platforms. And our website is unseen-film.com. And we'll also be creating a Spanish website, loquenoseve.com, for folks that speak Spanish, as we also try to seek Latin American audiences in the coming months.
Perfect. And yeah, all these like links and handles will all be somewhere either on the screen or in the description. So you'll be able to find them if you're watching or listening to this. And so with that, thank you so much for joining us. I'm so glad I was able to talk to you. I really did enjoy it. And I really hope people kind of go in and they end up going either at Hot Docs or in any of your other premieres or even next year, go and watch this documentary because I think it's an important documentary about issues which are important and the story which we can all relate to. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Khalil. I'm sorry, one more thing I forgot.
Yep.
Actually, the film is streaming through Hot Docs and for another 2 days. So if folks want to watch it, by streaming it through the Hot Docs platform throughout Canada, it is available for streaming for the next couple more days. Thank you so much for having me, Khalil. Really, really
Thank
appreciate
you
the
so much for
opportunity.
coming on. It
Thank
was
you.
great to talk to you.
Great talking to you too.
Bye.